Okay, let's talk about Chapter 1. This is Reflections on the Past. There is so much history in this one chapter. Just enthralled. Anyway, read it. I don't usually recommend reading every word of a chapter, but I like this chapter. So, totally up to you. If you are a skimmer, that's perfectly fine. Skim it. But if you come across something that's new to you, I always recommend actually stopping and reading. If you need any reading techniques or tips, I can certainly help with that too. Just let me know. But anyway, starting in this chapter, we talk about how the past provides us information to keep us from repeating mistakes. We want to learn from the past and maybe even take past methods and build upon them and make them better, not reinvent, but bring them back to light and just improve them overall. Starts out with early Hindu and Egyptian hospitals. Egyptian principles were I just said principles. Egyptian physicians were most likely the first to ever use like oils and opium, peppermint, some of the natural holistic things we think of today. Those Egyptians, they were brilliant people. Then the chapter moves into the Greek and the Romans. I believe the Greek were the first ones to ever have hospitals. In Greece is where physicians treated patients for the first time ever holistically. So they treated the mind, the body, and the soul. And that's instead of just looking at them and determining this or that, they really looked at the patients holistically in Greece. And there was someone, Hippocrates. Hippocrates is a big deal. Even today, medical doctors who graduate from school take the Hippocratic Oath. Hippocrates was a really unique person in our history, and he was the first to write on what he found. He performed surgical operations, described conditions such as epilepsy, malaria, etc. And actually, I believe, if I recall this correctly, the monks kept record of his items because he was so brilliant and they must have known it was going to be important. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So on page 3, we move into the hospitals, how they became very religious depending on where you lived in the world at the time. Then on page 4, it talks about military hospitals and how military hospitals, they learned a lot from those sectors because the military men and women were harmed and hurt so bad that they had an ample opportunity to look at anatomy and it was learning how to take care of these people infection-wise, bleeding-wise. So the book references it as a double-edged sword. Lots of advancement for surgery and medicine because the battle wounds were just so horrific. Then the chapter moves into the medieval times, the Dark Ages. What else can I tell you? Page 5 continues hospitals of the Renaissance. And that is where, I think that section is where they speak of Leonardo Da Vinci. He's a whole entire another unique human being that kept excellent records of medical information, dissections that he did. And a neat thing about Leonardo da Vinci is he wrote in code. He can't remember what his diagnosis officially was or is, but recently discovered. But almost like he was paranoid that somebody would find his information, so he wrote in code. Side note, that's not in this book. Sorry, I digressed. Okay, page 6. Hospitals of the 18th century. You can read about that. Early hospitals. So the first actual incorporated hospital in the United States of America was in Philadelphia. That's pretty cool to me. And around that time frame, a gentleman published a book bringing awareness to the conditions of how horrible, even though it was great that we had our first hospital, the conditions were just not very good. Overcrowding, infection rates. They were mixing patients, like infectious patients with patients that had just had surgery. Like, that's a big no-no. But they didn't know any better. So luckily, some people throughout history did take account of that and kept up with it. And anyway, Page 7 also talks about the first psychiatric hospital was founded in Williamsburg, Virginia. That's pretty neat too. Page 8, late 19th century Renaissance. There were dentists who were discovering antiseptics, ways to combat infection, doing different things there. The first official nursing school in the United States was, I think it was in Massachusetts. Yes, Brigham and Women's Hospital. Keep reading and it goes into progression of the infection control. And when pregnant women, a doctor was keeping notes of when pregnant women would get fever and die. They were able to monitor that and make some changes, and his mortality rate dropped significantly just with small changes. But steam was introduced during that time frame too, in the early Renaissance period. That helped a lot with infection, and we still sterilize our instruments and equipment with hot steam, so that hasn't changed much. Lister, if you've ever heard of Listerine, that's a mouthwash. Joseph Lister is actually the man who created the idea of antiseptics, destroying disease-bearing organisms. Page 9 at the bottom, then we get into the discovery of anesthesia and how anesthesia and antiseptics together have been regarded the most significant influence in the development of surgery in the modern time of healthcare. Can you imagine today not having anesthetic when you have your surgery and not even having a disinfectant or a way to combat infection? No, thank you. Okay, page 10, great information there, all about hospital laboratories, how the hospital structure started to change. Page 11, we start to discover x-rays. Different inventions have been created during this time. There's a lot of names and a lot of great things that have come from it. 20th century progress on page 11 talks about the discovery of how nutrition can actually make a difference in our wellness. But that actually, let me give my nurse friend a shout out. In the 1800s, Florence Nightingale actually discovered that nutrition was helping the soldiers on the battlefield recover from their wounds faster. But anyway, we'll give credit to Elmer McCullum's discovery of the vitamins, because that's correct. He discovered, she did not, but he discovered the impacts of just vitamin A and B on wellness and recovery. Page 12, the echocardiograph was invented. That was pretty big during that time. We actually still use that in healthcare today. Reform in the medical education began in the early century, and wholly due to the efforts of the Council of Medical Education in Hospitals, which was established in 1905. So now that's not too far, that's not too long ago. We're just talking within the last 10, 12 decades. 1918, founders drew up what was known as minimal standard, when we're talking about college and hospital standardization. Speaking of hospital standardization, that movement is focused on patients, not the doctors, the students, the medical support staff, nurses. That's focused on the actual patients. And then the last couple pages, we're moving into healthcare in the 21st century. We still struggle. We still learn every day, and that's why there's so much change in healthcare. We've got to do better. Translational medicine is mentioned. I flipped over to page 14. Minimally invasive surgery. So when I was a nurse, almost 25 years ago, women who had hysterectomies were in the hospital for 5 or 7 days. And also cataract surgeries. Those patients had to lie flat for 8 hours. We used to have to put sandbags on the patient's head, which makes no sense today. But that's what we used to do to keep them perfectly still. They could not move when the lens was implanted. And fast forward to 2022, you can do a hysterectomy on an outpatient basis where the patient goes home and recovers same day. And cataract surgeries go home within 15 minutes of the lens being placed. So modern medicine is always improving, always changing. Surgery simulation training. Many hospitals, especially ones associated with educational institutions, have sim labs, and those are pretty neat. If you've never been in one, maybe you could visit, or you could even YouTube some of the videos. It's neat what you can do, simulating surgery, simulating traumas, simulating, performing CPR, that type of thing. It's a safe place to make mistakes, learn how to communicate with the healthcare team, etc. Social media is mentioned on page 14. National health insurance became a thing during 2010. That's an improvement because currently. Well, let me back up. Before then, you could buy health insurance through some of the major companies, or you got it through your employer. There wasn't a national platform or level that was affordable, so that helped. So today you have that option if you don't get your health insurance through your employer. Boutique medicine has come about. Medical errors have plagued hospitals from day one. They still are a part of our culture, unfortunately, but there are things in place that they are improving. I love walking through the hospital and seeing the shout outs or the congratulations of units that have had zero medical errors for like 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. That's excellent that they're acknowledged and they are rewarded for that. Well, and the patients have great outcomes too. That's one of the most important things. Page 15, the last little section, history challenges us to do better. So that is chapter 1. Please review this chapter. You may not have been as excited about it as I, but that was some pretty neat stuff, having been in the field for almost 25 years. Please reach out to me if you need anything, and I'll record one for the next chapter.